Good evening. I'm Markian Fedushak, president of Walking Mountain Science Center.
And my name is Scott Dunn. I'm a community programs coordinator here at Walking Mountains. And I'd like to welcome you all to our third presentation of the Don and Jennifer Holsworth Climate Speaker Series, where we continue to bring in a variety of experts from around the country to explore the ecological and societal consequences of climate change and how we can be creative in taking action against it. Tonight's program is virtual, and the best way to engage with our presenter tonight is to use the Q&A feature throughout the presentation. We have a team here that'll be accumulating those questions, and then we'll have about a 30-minute Q&A following our main presentation. Now, the mission of Walking Mountain Science Center is to awaken a sense of wonder and inspire environmental stewardship and sustainability through natural science education. By you all joining us tonight, you are helping us fulfill that mission, but more importantly, you're also helping us to increase climate change awareness, understanding, and help our community take bold action. I would also like to take this time to acknowledge our partner in this program this evening, the Eagle County Climate Action Collaborative. Before we introduce our main presentation this evening, I'd like to hand it over to Markian to speak a little more about what the collaborative is doing in our community. Mark?
Thank you, Scott. And as you can see, we have some evening rays of sun shining down on us, which is a good thing, but sorry, the light is a little funky. So we're just going to keep rolling with it. The Climate Action Collaborative, made up of Eagle County and our local towns and municipalities, nonprofits, businesses, and volunteers, with specific goals to reduce CO2 emission 50% by 2030. The listed sector groups, energy supply, buildings, waste, and transportation, are made up of experts that work collaboratively to undertake initiatives to accomplish this goal. The entire collaborative is governed by a group of publicly elected officials and government employees providing the funding and establishing policies to help reach these goals. So we welcome you all to get involved in climate action, in our Climate Action Collaborative, and helping us to achieve that important goal. Now I'd like to let you know more about Don and Jennifer Holsworth, the presenters and sponsors of this new series. Don is a board member of Walking Mountain Science Center, and Jennifer is on the board of the Friends of Mountain Rescue. They are also active organizers of a climate conversation speaker series in North Carolina, and their philanthropic work is singularly focused on supporting environmental and educational organizations active in the fight to slow climate change and its impacts. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening, Don and Jennifer. And now I would like to pass things over to Don to introduce our speaker for the evening.
Markian, thanks so much. And hello, everyone. I'm speaking to you from North Carolina, where the sun is down, so no rays of sun bothering us. And it's a beautiful 65, 70-degree day, which is unusual in the past. Unfortunately, not so unusual today. It's very important to us that for us to have sponsored this series, and I hope we do it again next season, because for us, getting people educated on the existential threat of climate change is a key priority for us. But you can educate yourself a great deal, but you're like us, I'm sure often you're sort of stymied. And how do you talk to your family? How do you talk to your friends? How do you communicate the concerns that you have without alienating people who have different views? Well, we're going to learn a lot about that tonight. And I'm really pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Joy Hassol. I've known Susan for the past 6 years, and I absolutely know 100% you're going to enjoy her presentation. We invite you to have a lot of Q&A afterwards. Susan is the Director of Climate Communication. She's an award-winning climate change communicator and author known for her ability to translate science into English. For 3 decades, she has helped scientists communicate more effectively and provide clear information to policymakers and journalists. Susan is an IPCC author and has written and edited numerous high-level reports, including the first 3 U.S. national climate assessments. She has testified to the U.S. Senate, written an HBO documentary, and writes popular articles and op-eds, including in the New York Times, LA Times, and Scientific American in recent months. Impressively, she is the recipient of the 2021 Ambassador Award from the American Geophysical Union and is also a Fellow of AGU and of the American Association for the Advancement of Science for her exceptional contributions to the communication of climate change science to policymakers and to the public. Susan, I'm very grateful that you're here to share with you your expertise on communicating both the urgency and opportunity of climate action. It's all yours.
I'm really pleased to be with you tonight to talk about communicating the urgency and opportunity of climate action. My website, climatecommunication.org, and I tweet at climatecomms. And what I wanted to tell you at the outset is that while I'm coming to you tonight from Asheville, North Carolina, I actually, for 25 years, lived just over the hill from you, and I was an Eagle County resident. And there I am with my daughter and our goats, and with Mount Sopris in the background. And at just around that time, in the year 2000, I was working on the first US National Climate Assessment. Now, at that time, climate change was an issue for the future. We were predicting what it might look like, depending on what we did about it. We were talking about how we might be seeing a trend toward a shorter snow season and so forth. Well, of course, by now, 22 years later, climate change has moved firmly into the present. We're experiencing it everywhere. Here in the West, that means trends towards drought, wildfires, and a shorter snow season and a smaller snowpack. Now, of course, that doesn't mean it's going to be that way every year, but the trends are very clear, and you're learning very much what that means. Now, by 2006, when my HBO film came out, we were already starting to see it a little bit. 2005 was at that time the hottest year on record. Now, of course, since then, all the hottest years on record have been in the last dozen years. So when we talk about climate change, it's really important that we talk about both the threat and the opportunity, because they invoke both worry and hope. And research shows that those are actually the best emotions to invoke, because they make people who are worried and are hopeful tend to be those that support policies on climate change. Now, a lot of times when we talk about climate change, people think, oh, it's so complicated. How can you even begin to tell this story to people? And so I like to say, I can tell it to you in 10 words. It's real, it's us. Experts agree, it's urgent, and there's hope. Now, of course, there's a lot more to say about all of that, but that gives you the broad brush. I think it's really important to make the point that it's not just about saving the Earth. This is not just about plants, penguins, and polar bears. It's about people. It's about our economy, our way of life, and everything that we hold dear. When I talk about climate change and what I want to talk to you about tonight, I think about three big high-level themes. One is choice, right? We're not just being hit by some cosmic bus. We are the cause of climate change. And so we have a choice in what kind of future we want to have. Will it get a little bit worse that we can adapt to and deal with? Or will it get completely out of control and be a global catastrophe? The choice is ours. The second big theme, of course, is urgency. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that. And the third is opportunity. And we're going to talk a lot about that tonight as well. So first, let me talk about why it's so urgent. Now, if any of you have been paying attention to the headlines lately, you've seen a lot of shocked scientists, stunned scientists. Right now, it's unthinkable what we're seeing at both poles. We're seeing temperatures 50 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit above normal. And that heat dome, that huge heat wave that we had in the Pacific Northwest this past summer, usually we break heat records by 1/10 of a degree or 1/4 of a degree. But in that heat wave, we broke the heat records, the temperature records by 10 degrees. We had never seen anything like that. And it really did shock the scientists. Similarly, we're seeing that around the world now. So another point, another reason I think that you might understand how urgent this is. I sometimes hear people think that scientists might be exaggerating this problem. And I'm here to tell you that if anything, it's the opposite. Scientists tend to be quite conservative about what they say. And these reports, the IPCC and the National Climate Assessments, everyone has to agree. all the scientists have to agree on what is being said and the language that's being used. So these reports tend to be a little on the conservative side. Also, some of the climate models that we're currently using, while they're excellent and they capture all the big physics, things like heat waves and heavy downpours because the warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, they don't capture some of the nuances that also are affecting our weather, particularly extreme weather, such as changes in atmospheric patterns like the jet stream, wind patterns. So we tend to see not an exaggeration, but erring on the side of least drama. Now, there are also political and economic reasons why it's urgent. So right now, the Build Back Better plan is at the moment dead, and we still hope that some of the climate provisions will be brought forward in a new bill. So who is this man and why is he standing alone in an empty warehouse? Well, he's the CEO of a battery company. They make these batteries. He was planning on increasing production by at least 8-fold, creating many, many jobs. And he's waiting to see if those tax incentives and Build Back Better come through. Because if they don't come through, he's not going to make that investment. See, Build Back Better includes $550 billion in clean energy and climate investments, and $300 billion of that is in the form of tax credits and incentives. An analysis showed that each month of delay to these tax incentives is costing the US economy $2 billion in economic activity. So these tax incentives would more than double clean energy investment to $750 billion over the next 10 years and create hundreds of thousands of US jobs. But that's only if we get them passed. So the great political scientist Leah Stokes at UC Santa Barbara said, investors are waiting in the wings to deploy capital for clean energy. This industry is poised to be the major engine of 21st century prosperity. Without these government incentives, that capital won't get deployed. And with them, we're poised to have that prosperous clean energy economy. Now, at the same time, there are some things that could be missed opportunities. I have a question mark on this because I am still hoping that we are going to challenge these things successfully. You must have heard by now that the US Postal Service under DeJoy is planning to buy mostly gasoline-powered delivery trucks. That's crazy, right? The mail delivery fleet is our largest US fleet. It's something like 160,000 vehicles, and it's perfect to be electrified. They do a lot of short local driving, lots of stops. They're in neighborhoods where noise and vehicle exhaust are issues. They all go back to one location at the end of the day where they could be conveniently charged overnight when there's excess electricity and the prices are lowest. So instead, they're ordering gas-guzzling vehicles made by Oshkosh Defense. They look like tanks, urban assault vehicles. The analysis was badly flawed. They assumed gas prices that were half of current levels. You know, and there's another thing that just came out, which is that the Tennessee Valley Authority is planning to build a bunch of gas plants instead of solar and wind, even though solar and wind are cheaper. So we need to do something about this, right? We need to replace the appointees from the last administration that are making bad decisions for our future. And we need to let our leaders know that we don't want to see these missed opportunities go through. We want to change them while we still can. Now, I've told you some bad news about why this is so urgent, and I think I want to shift gears a little and tell you a little bit of good news, including what Americans think about climate change and how that's changing over time. So my colleagues at Yale and George Mason have been surveying Americans for the last dozen years or so, twice a year. And what they've found is that there aren't two Americas. There are 6 distinct categories of Americans, ranging from those who are most alarmed to those who are most dismissive. And one of the things that's very interesting about this chart is how it's changed over these last dozen years. It has moved strongly to the left side of this chart. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the alarmed group and the dismissive group, the two ends, were about equal in size. But now the alarmed, for the first time, is the largest group. At first, the largest groups were those in the middle, kind of cautious and disengaged. But now the largest group are alarmed. And then the next largest group is concerned. So that's good news. That means we're moving in the right direction. People are getting it. Now, my friends at Yale have also downscaled this data on the US map all the way down to the level of counties, so we can see what people think in different parts of the country. So this map shows us the estimated percentage of adults who are worried about global warming. This is now at a record high. 65% of Americans all across this country say that they are worried about global warming. The scale to the right shows you the blue is down in the low percentages, going up to 100 at the strongest red colors. So if Americans are so worried about global warming, why aren't they talking about it? Here's the estimated percentage of adults who say they discuss global warming at least occasionally, and it's only 35%. It's blue everywhere. So if people are so worried about it, why aren't they talking about it? So this is the first thing that I'm going to encourage you to do. Talk about it. It's one of the most important things we can do. Now, how are you going to do that? What does good communication look like? Simple, clear messages, repeated often by a variety of trusted sources. That's the secret to good communication. So how do you do that? How do you become a trusted source? You want to connect on values because people trust those with whom they share values. You want to look for common ground and you want to make it personal. So if you're going to make it personal and connect on values, you first want to ask, what do people value? The person you're going to talk to, the audience you're going to address. Are they people of faith? Then you might want to talk about creation care, taking care of God's creation and the least of these. Are they concerned about water? Do they like to ski or snowmobile? Are they concerned about winter recreation and want to keep winter cool? Do they like to fly fish? And are they seeing that some of those cold water trout streams are not seeing as many of those cold water trout as they used to? Are they bird watchers? They're seeing different birds at their feeder and they're seeing different migration patterns. Do they eat food? Do they drink water? Everybody does, of course. And climate change is affecting agriculture and water resources. So there are many things that people value and they're all being affected by climate change. Now, if you know that people are skeptical of human-caused climate change, you might not want to charge right through that front door about human-caused climate change. You might want to look for a side door. So I always tell people, if the front door is locked, instead of banging your head against it, find a side door, because the atmosphere doesn't care what people believe or think. It just responds to what they do. So let me give you a hint at what a good side door might be. Let me show you another one of these Yale climate opinion maps. This one is the estimated percentage of adults who think global warming is mostly caused by human activity. Now, this is not great news, right? Because the national average is just 57%. Only 57% of Americans understand that we are the cause of global warming, even though scientists have been convinced of that at the 99.9% level for quite some time. So every area that's blue on this map is less than 50% of the people that accept that human activities are the cause of global warming. So what's the side door? Whoa, this map looks much better. This is the estimated percentage of adults who support tax rebates for those purchasing energy efficient vehicles or solar panels. And what this is telling us is that everyone loves clean energy. 77% of people are willing to pay with their own tax dollars to give people incentives for clean energy. So this is a side door. Talk about clean energy because almost everybody likes it. So just hot off the press, this poll was in the field a week ago. So it takes into account not only people's thoughts about clean energy, but also their thoughts about Russia's invasion of Ukraine and what that means for the world as a whole. And so these data just came out yesterday, and this shows the support for increasing clean energy production in America. The percentage of likely voters that support that is 69%. It's 87% among Democrats, 66% among independents, and even a majority of Republicans want to support increasing clean energy production in America. So that's interesting and it's important. And then when we dig down even a little deeper, we see the percentage of likely voters who support increasing wind and solar energy production is up at 73%, providing consumer rebates for electric vehicles, which, as you know, probably in the Build Back Better Act, we were talking about tax rebates of over $12,000 for buying an electric vehicle. That brings it into line with buying an internal combustion vehicle. So everybody's next car should be electric, and that's at 62%. And even for manufacturing and sending heat pumps to Europe so that they could replace their gas-powered and oil-powered furnaces with electric-powered heat pumps that could be powered with clean, renewable energy. So this is all Americans are in support of these things. Now, if you're tempted to wonder if this is mainly driven by our geopolitical situation and the war in Europe, I wanted to just harken back to the data from 2018, which found that large majorities of voters wanted the US to use more solar and wind power, even in 2018. And you can see here, 80% wanted us to use more solar, 73% more wind, and so on. And very low percentages wanted to see us using more fossil fuels. Now, one reason for that is that there are lots of benefits to clean energy, right? We get cleaner air, we get research and technological development, we get economic growth and job creation, we get cleaner, healthier, more walkable communities, we send fewer kids to the hospital with asthma. Now, this study that was done in 2015 looked at 24 countries and found that action on climate change was motivated by other benefits, especially kind of economic and scientific benefits, and building healthier communities. And this was true equally among those who were convinced and those who were unconvinced about the reality and importance of human-caused climate change. So what this tells us is that all of these benefits motivate people, so we can focus our communications on those kinds of things that everyone agrees on. And they don't have to be motivated by climate change, because as I said, the atmosphere doesn't really care what you think, it just cares what you do. So one of my favorite examples of people being motivated by something other than climate change to do the right thing is the Kentucky Coal Museum covered its roof in solar panels. And why did they do that? Not because of climate change, but because it saved them $8,000 a year. Now, I want to shift gears again just a little bit and talk to you about something that's really important to me, and that is the language of climate change. So I've been interested in this for 30 years. I've written about it, I've spoken about it. So who knew a few weeks ago, the BBC World News was really interested in the language of climate change. And they interviewed me for 6 minutes live on the BBC World News. And if you go to my Twitter feed at Climate Comms, you can see some short clips from that interview. And we talked all about language. The host asked me, well, certainly everyone must know what climate change means. And I said, well, not so much, because, scientists use the term climate change to talk about any change in climate at any time in Earth's history for any reason. So what we're looking at now is really human-caused climate disruption. We are changing the natural patterns of Earth's climate system. And then he asked me about the term greenhouse gases. And I said, I don't think most people understand what greenhouse gases means, because that assumes they understand the metaphor of the greenhouse. So I like to call them heat trapping gases, because that's what they do. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, they trap heat, and it's like thickening the blanket around the planet and heating it up. So if you're interested in this, I did a whole TEDx talk, 18 minutes, on the subject of the language of climate change, and you can find it at my website, climatecommunication.org. I also published this article called Unnatural Disasters. And I have a problem with people calling some of these big extreme events that we're seeing lately natural disasters, because they're not natural. These events are exacerbated by human-caused climate change, as well as other stupid things people do, like building in floodplains or right on the coast in a place where sea level's rising, or building at the wildland-urban interface and being susceptible to wildfires. So I like to call them unnatural disasters. Similarly, I don't like people using the term natural gas. It's methane gas, it's fossil gas. There's nothing natural about digging up billion-year-old carbon and releasing it to the atmosphere in the geological blink of an eye. Now, one of my other concerns about language and climate change is that there are words that mean entirely different things to scientists than they do to the public. And these words can cause a lot of confusion. So when scientists use the term aerosol, they're not talking about a spray can, which is what the public thinks. They're talking about tiny particles in the atmosphere. And when scientists say positive, they mean upward. So positive sounds good to the public, but a positive trend in climate is an upward trend in temperature. And similarly, positive feedback sounds like a good thing, right? You do a good job, you get positive feedback. But scientists use that term in climate change to talk about a vicious cycle in which warming causes even more warming, so it feeds on itself. It's not positive. So I've been thinking about this for a long time. I published an article about it, and we included this table of terms that have scientific terms, public meanings, and better choices. You can get this article at my website, climatecommunication.org, under resources and articles. So don't try and absorb the whole thing right now. But like the word theory, to the public, it's just some theory. It's just a hunch or a guess. But to a scientist, it's something that's very well established in science and can be used to make predictions. You also might notice the word error. Now, to the public, an error just means wrong, right? But to scientists, they use the term error, like error bars being like a range, an uncertainty range around a particular measurement. So I tease my colleagues. I tell them when I retire, I'm going to open a tavern just for them, and I'm going to call it the error bar. Now, another thing I wanted to tell you about language is that metaphors are an excellent way of communicating what we know and helping people to absorb complex topics. So, for example, in this picture, I'm using the metaphor of the CO2 highway. So what happens if we miss our exit? So what happens if we can't keep global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius? So if you were on a highway and you missed your exit, what would you do? You'd slow down and you'd get off at the very next exit. And that's what we'll have to do. If we miss 1.5, we'll slow down and we'll try and stop at 1.6. And if we can't do that, at 1.7, because every 1/10 of a degree matters. It's not a hard line that below a certain level we're safe and above it we're in trouble. So even now, we've seen 1.2 degrees Celsius of warming, and even now we're experiencing dangerous climate change. So it's not like we're safe now and we'll be unsafe above that certain level. So this is a good metaphor for understanding that continuum. Now, let me just summarize. The current state of affairs is that we've had a big increase in public understanding and concern, but unfortunately, that has not yet translated into the needed policies. The partisan gap has grown, and that's not going to be a surprise to anyone. Democrats are much more likely to be concerned about climate change and support strong climate policy than are Republicans. But the good news is that young Republicans are not as skeptical as their older counterparts. They are much more concerned about climate change and their future. The other thing is that people are not hearing much about it socially, as I showed you. The whole climate war is changing. And my colleague Michael Mann wrote this book called The New Climate War. And in it, he talks about how we now have a new forms of denial and disinformation. Instead of just being about the basic science, they're about the solutions. There's deflection, where the big fossil fuel companies would like us, they're deflecting attention away from themselves and onto us. They want us as individuals to be very worried about our own carbon footprints, so we're not worried about theirs. And of course, both matter, right? There's division, where they're trying to actually divide the climate community by having us fight amongst ourselves, saying, oh, if you fly in an airplane, you shouldn't have anything to say about climate change. And there's doomism, where some people are saying, oh, it's too late, there's nothing we can do. And that, of course, is really a bad idea, because if there's nothing we can do, then why would you bother trying to do anything? Now, there's something really interesting, and that is the rise of solutions denial. People are now, so this is a fascinating study. It's a computer-assisted analysis of contrarian claims from conservative think tank websites and contrarian blogs. And what you're seeing here is the percentage, right? It's the proportion of claims that were focused on, I told you, like, it's bad, it's us. So some of those claims, about 20%, would say it's not us, it's not bad, it's not happening. And look, the claims that say solutions won't work, increasingly questioning whether climate policy or renewable energy could work, they were down around 20% back in the year 2000, and they're now up around 60%. So they've shifted, right? The argument no longer is that the science is unreliable so much as the solutions won't work. So they keep moving the goalposts. But you know, the solutions reality is that we're not waiting for an energy miracle because we've already had one. And what this chart shows you is that just 10 years ago, solar energy was the most expensive form of electricity. And now, 10 years later, it is the least expensive way to make electricity. Wind 10 years ago was around in the middle of the pack, and now it's the second cheapest, just after solar. So people can be forgiven for not knowing this, because just 10 years ago, these were expensive, but now they're cheap. They are the cheapest sources. And the price of solar and wind have continued to fall from 2019 to the present. And so now they're even cheaper. And what this takes into account is what they call the levelized cost of energy. So it captures both the cost of building the power plant as well as fuel and operating costs over the lifetime of the plant. So no one can do everything, but everyone can do something. Talk about it. Listen and connect on values. Focus on solutions that everyone can agree on. Explain the choice we face. Explain the urgency and the opportunity. So what can you do right now? Vote. Vote climate. Call your leaders. Engage in local and state climate action. Volunteer, support the local climate action collaborative that's right there in Eagle County. Fly less, drive less. Drive an efficient or electric car if you need to drive a car. Opt for renewable energy. And even if you're a renter, even if you don't have good solar access, you can join community solar. That's what I do here because there are too many trees around my house for solar to work well on my roof. So I get all my electricity from a community solar project, and it costs me hardly anything. This is minor stuff, but still worth doing. Switch to LED lights, minimize your electricity use, cut down on meat, especially beef and lamb, because they're very high in carbon intensity. Reduce food waste. And vote with your dollars on both your purchases and your investments. Don't invest in fossil fuel companies. Don't invest in these broad-based funds that are often invested in fossil fuel companies. Be careful about those. And on your purchases and with your banking. Finance is really important. A lot of the big American banks are funding fossil fuel development. What can we do as a society? I just recently published an article in Scientific American where I say there are 3 big things we need to do. We need to phase out fossil fuels, deploy clean energy, and protect our forests. So just in a little bit more detail, to phase out fossil fuels, we should have no new fossil fuel infrastructure, no new wells, no new exploration, no new pipelines, none of that. But that's not what's happening. They're still exploring, they're still drilling, and they're still building. We are on track to produce twice the fossil fuels 10 years from now than would be consistent with the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal that countries of the world agreed to in Paris. We have to vastly increase the efficiency with which we use energy. We need to electrify everything, including transport, because we can then power it with clean electricity. We need to improve public transportation, bike lanes, and alternative ways of getting around. We've got to beef up our electric grid so it can carry those clean electrons, switch to non-carbon energy. And we've got to do more sustainable forestry and agriculture. And in short, we've got to do as much as we can, as fast as we can. The good news is, it's a man-made problem and it has man-made solutions. The actions have multiple benefits. We know what to do. We have most of what we need. Some people in places are already doing it. We are not starting from scratch. The clean energy revolution is well underway. We just need to speed it up. So let's look at some of what's happening. In this year, planned US capacity retirements in the electric generating arena for this year, 85% of those planned capacity retirements are coal, and another 8% are gas. That's good news. We are moving the fossil fuels out of the system. We need to do it faster. And what are we replacing them with? The capacity additions for 2022 nationwide, 46% of that is solar, 17% is wind, 11% battery storage. So that's all good. I'm not thrilled about the 21% gas plants, methane gas, fossil gas that's coming online, but those plants were started before just this year. Hopefully in the future, we're going to see that go way down. Now look at this. Texas is the leader in 2021 in new installations of clean energy. Texas. So what this tells you is it's not because of climate change. It's not just happening in the blue states. Texas is on top and by a lot. It lapped California, and Oklahoma is up there too. So this is driven by economics, and that's the good news. And in the future, Texas is ahead. The Clean Power Pipeline, these are the projects that are under construction or in an advanced stage of development. And again, Texas is on top. Wind is in blue, solar is yellow, storage is green. There's one other thing that you should keep your eye on here, and that's offshore wind. That's in dark blue on this chart. And you can see some of the eastern states, New York, Virginia, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, have planned some big projects in offshore wind. This is the energy of the future. There is so much potential there. We just had this big offshore wind lease in what they call the New York Bight. It's off the coast of New York and New Jersey. And they drew competitive bids that averaged $9,000 per acre. Compare that to the largest oil and gas lease sale to date in the Gulf of Mexico that averaged $25 per acre. So that oil and gas, they're the dinosaurs. That's the energy of the past. Offshore wind, that's the energy of the future. So what's going on around the world? Who's taking the lead on offshore wind? Here are the countries with installed offshore wind capacity in megawatts. The United States is way down here. The big ones are the UK, China, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark. These are the countries that are winning the clean energy race. There is a lot of wind offshore, even more than onshore. But the US has some catching up to do, but there's some plans in the works. Here are some US states that have offshore wind energy goals. Now, these are just goals, so we have to see if they'll actually achieve them. But you see quite a few states in the US with some good offshore goals. Now, here's some more good news. I never thought I would see this. Who would have thought that Mr. Peabody and his coal train was going to launch R3 renewables and start investing in solar and storage? But they are. And I had always hoped that this would happen, that the fossil fuel companies would come to see themselves as energy companies and move to the energy of the future. So maybe this is starting to happen. Here's another really interesting thing to keep your eye on, and that's geothermal energy. This map shows you the temperatures at 10 kilometers below the surface. And you can see that out west, you have tremendous geothermal potential. This is where you get the hot springs from. But the new geothermal technology is drilling down deeper. And so we can have usable geothermal energy almost across the entire country with some of these new technologies. And when they solve some of these engineering problems, they're going to have so much energy it could power everything. And of course, we don't need it to power everything. We just need it to help, right? The other really interesting thing about geothermal is that the oil and gas industry knows a lot. They have know-how. They have staff that are experts in geology. Why can't they put that to use, what they've used for fracking and their other geological efforts? Why can't they put that to use in the geothermal arena? So I hope that that's what happens. That's the direction we should be moving. So if you're interested in solutions, there are some excellent resources. Rocky Mountain Institute, RMI, just down the block from you all. Almost down the block. They started off in Old Snowmass, Colorado. I was there at the beginning, and now they're in both Basalt and in Boulder, and they have excellent resources. Energy Innovation is another great place, especially for both the policies and the technologies, but their policy analyses are excellent. And Project Drawdown at drawdown.org. All of these are great places for you to find really good information on solutions. And, I want to leave you with this really good news message. the future is in our hands. How bad this gets or how good we make the future, that's for us to decide. So I hope we'll make the right decision. And I hope everybody here is going to get to work doing everything they can, because communicating the urgency and opportunity of climate action is something all of us can contribute to. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. And thank you, Don.
Thank you, Susan. Outstanding as usual. I've heard you speak numerous times and I've always learned something new. Thank you so much. We have some questions that have come in and we have plenty of time for a robust Q&A, really about 45 minutes. So please do put your questions in the chat. I'll start out with a couple here. Actually, Adam Quinton has asked 2 questions, Susan, and these are questions that are, I think, on the minds of a lot of people. The first one is that given the urgency of the climate crisis and the near unanimity of science on this, at what point do you conclude that someone that you may be talking to is just a closed mind on the climate change and that your energies are better invested moving on to the next mind that you might be able to actually influence in a positive way?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Now, as I showed you with the 6 Americas, only 9% of people are really dismissive. Those are the closed-minded people. And the only time I think it's really worthwhile to talk to someone who is truly dismissive is if there are other people listening, right? So if you're on social media, you're not going to change that person's mind, that dismissive person's mind, but there's an audience. And you've got to make sure that they are hearing the right message. So if there's anybody else listening, it's worth making the arguments. Now, one of the things you might do is, as I was explaining, find a side door. Don't try to hit them over the head with more and more facts about how we know that it's warming and we know that it's us, because those aren't what's going to get through to them. Ask them if they want to buy solar panels from China or sell them to China. Do they care about who's going to win the clean energy race and America's place in a competitive global economy? So the energy race that's the future, is in clean energy. So if they're stuck, if they're just not wanting to hear, try just changing the subject, because we don't care why they do the right thing as long as they do the right thing. So I tend to agree that it's not worth wasting a lot of time with someone who's a denier, as I said, unless others are listening. But maybe, just maybe, you can change their mind by talking to them about something that's not specifically climate change, but will still have the same effect. So talk about clean energy. That would be my best advice, I think, is to start with all the other benefits. There's a great cartoon that says, what if global warming is all a hoax and we created a better world for nothing? So we're going to create a better world, all of these other reasons. We want to do it anyway. We can't keep using fossil fuels. They're dirty. They're going to run out. Who doesn't want to use clean, renewable energy? So that's the direction. We just have to speed it up. We're winning, just not fast enough.
Great. Susan, Adam asked another question, which is, I think, really excellent. So you mentioned that the partisan divide on climate change has grown, except amongst the young. But why is that? Why is there a divide at all? The US seems to be the only major country with an equivalent divide between major parties. Look at the Conservative Party in the UK. Boris Johnson is a conservative, but very aggressive on climate action. So what makes the US such an outlier? And let's not forget, as he points out, that the EPA was created by Richard Nixon, as well as the Clean Air Act extension and the Endangered Species Act. So what's up?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I do have answers for you. A big piece of this has to do with the merchants of doubt. So the fossil fuel industry is largely US based. And the fossil fuel industry has known for 50 years that their products were going to cause global warming. They had their own scientists doing the research, writing reports, and telling them, and we have all of this information now, this has all come out over time. They knew, and what did they do about it? They launched a massive disinformation campaign to cast doubt on the science. just like the tobacco companies. They used the very same playbook. So this country was subject to much more of that intense disinformation campaign than any place else in the world. Now, there is some denial, not nearly as much, but some in Canada, in the UK, and in Australia, which could lead one to believe that speaking English is the problem. I'm kidding. But what it does say is that, you know, these are countries that in which disinformation has played a very big role. We don't see this kind of political divide in other places. You're right. And there shouldn't be a political divide. There are no Republican and Democratic thermometers. You know, this is affecting all of us. It's affecting red states at least as much as blue states, if not more. In fact, the Southeast is one of the most vulnerable places to climate change, and it's one of the reddest part of the country. So it really does not make sense. But another explanation is that people listen to their elites. People listen to their leaders. And a lot of the elites, a lot of the leaders in the Republican Party are very well funded by the fossil fuel industry. And so they are taking the party line. They are, I hate to say it, bought and paid for by the fossil fuel industry, and they are doing their bidding. And people are listening to their leaders because they share values with them. Remember, I said people trust who they share values with. Well, they share other cultural values with them. So if these leaders are telling them climate change is bunk, then that's what they're going to believe. It also matters where they get their news. If they're getting their news from Fox News, they're getting a lot of disinformation, and that's really unfortunate. But that's something that's changed over time too, as our news sources have divided in the ways that they have, right? It used to be when I was a kid, there were these 3 TV networks. Everybody watched the same TV. Everybody read the same newspapers. We didn't divide up politically and each have our own source of information. So that's another big piece of the problem is the media. And now with social media, that problem is even worse. With Facebook, people are just in their own little echo chamber. So I would say the reason we have this terrible partisan divide is a result of all of that, all of those things that I've just mentioned. In terms of why the young Republicans are more concerned, I think they have heard the science more. They also understand that it's their future, and they're not as steeped and stuck in the politics of listening to these old leaders. You know, these, I hate to say it, it's mostly older white males. And there have been papers written about this. They call them the cool dudes. And these are the people who are still the deniers. Those dismissives are almost all older white Republican males, sadly. So we've got some work to do. And maybe the best way to win those people over is not by talking about climate change at all. So I know, Don, you have some friends who are Republicans and who are not very accepting of the science of climate change, but they're still involved in solar and wind because of the economics, right?
I have a close Republican friend, I think, is on the call, who is a strong Republican and building a lot of solar projects in Texas. So thank you, Pete. So there's a lot of good questions coming in now, and there's a couple ones. I think these will probably be shorter responses, able to articulate. So if solar is so cheap, if we were to deregulate utilities so that consumers were able to select and who and what what supplies their electricity, would allow market forces to encourage more solar. So in other words, would deregulation give people more choices? What do you think about that?
It's an interesting question, and I will say that I am not an expert on utility regulation, but I do know that there's some utilities are like regulated monopolies essentially in most places, and some regulation is actually not a bad thing, because you can have a situation like they have in Texas where they're not regulated, and so they take the cheapest way out and they don't properly insulate their power plants, for example, which is why they had that terrible problem last winter where everything froze. All their natural gas plants froze, their methane gas plants, I even said it. And so, you want some regulation to protect the public. However, competition is not a bad thing. And, so we have to sort that out. And there are people who know way more than I do about the regulation of the utility industry, what works, what doesn't. So I fear treading into territory in which I don't have enough expertise. There are some great people online. I mentioned Leah Stokes in my talk at UC Santa Barbara. Follow her on Twitter, look for her work online. She knows a lot about these questions. And there's actually quite a few people out there. Jesse Jenkins is another that really know a lot about that whole question that you're asking. And it's an important one, but I'm afraid I'm not the best expert on it.
And Susan, as an old white guy, I just want to point out, I think, it's not just a Republican Party, right? It's in the pocket of the solar industry. And there are key Democrats who are holding up the Build Back Better Act, who are clearly in the pocket. So
in particular,
I think people recognize that, but if they don't, they should.
Well, on that score, Don, I think it's worth pointing out that Joe Manchin has gotten more money from the fossil fuel industry than anybody else in Washington. So there's a reason that the one Democrat that's held this up has held it up. And he is also personally very invested in the coal industry. So sadly.
It's very sad.
Yeah, because there was so much good stuff for West Virginia and Build Back Better. Retraining for the miners, all kinds of stuff that has to be done there. And I think the people of West Virginia really want to Build Back Better. The miners want to be retrained in other good jobs, and they want to be protected. And right now they're not being protected. Those companies, their CEOs get golden parachutes and they leave those coal miners without even their pensions. So those people need to be protected. So I am very much in favor of a just transition. We need to be very mindful of the people that could be left behind in the clean energy transition. We don't want to leave anyone behind. We want to take care of those people. And we also want to keep in mind environmental justice, that communities of color have often been where the power plants are built and who have sacrificed and suffered so much from the dirty energy of the past. We have to make sure we're taking care of those people as we move forward into the clean energy economy.
It's true for our indigenous populations as well. And I did read an article today, and I'll go to the next question real quickly, that there's a major battery plant going to be built in West Virginia, and the Coal Miners Union is working with them to retrain the workers to work at those plants. So it's really great. Kate Haber wanted to know, and I don't know myself, but are you familiar with the Climate Coaches Alliance?
No.
Climate Coaches Alliance. So Kate, you may want to pop in the chat what you know about that, or
tell us more.
Give us a link. Kate also asked said that T. Boone Pickens was an early advocate for wind. And so she's wondering if this is the moment to invest in wind, even if Build Back Better Act does not pass.
Well, I think it is. I certainly invest in clean energy of all kinds. And I do think solar, wind, battery storage, and other kinds of storage are a really good investment, because even without Build Back Better, these are still the cheapest forms of energy. And they are the energy of the future. And, I think geothermal is a good bet. I don't know exactly what's going to happen when, but something's going to happen, and something's going to happen with offshore wind for sure. So there's also all kinds of other sort of niche things. There's wave energy and tidal energy and ocean thermal energy conversion. There's all kinds of renewable energy sources that are being developed. And, there may be some really big breakthroughs. There may be a breakthrough in the nuclear arena. I mean, so far it's not looking good, but, we get about 20% of our electricity from our existing nuclear plants in this country. We want to keep those online as long as we safely can. We don't want to have to be replacing that clean energy, because once those plants are built, then the energy they're producing is carbon free. So like many people, I'm in favor of keeping those plants, extending their lives as long as we can safely do so. But then when we talk about another generation of nuclear, right now, it still looks like it will be too slow and too expensive. But if there are some big breakthroughs there in the technology, if there's a breakthrough in fusion, for example, and we can do that and not produce the waste and not have some of the same, power plant danger issues, then that would be great. And if they come up with an inexpensive small modular reactor and they've solved all the problems of weapons grade material proliferation and plant safety and waste, then nuclear is fine. And cost. I mean, right now, nuclear is just the most expensive thing we've got. In fact, in Build Back Better was a lot of money to help struggling nuclear plants to stay online. Because if without them, some of those plants may close because it's uneconomical even to operate these existing power plants. So we don't want them to go offline because right now they're providing carbon-free power. So that's a whole nother, interesting area, nuclear is. It's still the most complicated and expensive way we've ever figured out to boil water. So it's not the first choice. The first choice is energy efficiency, right? As Amory Lovins calls them, negawatts instead of megawatts, right? A megawatt saved is as good as a megawatt produced or better because there are no environmental impacts from it.
So Susan, do you know if lithium is a byproduct of geothermal energy? It's a question that Kate Haber asked.
I don't think it's a byproduct of it. It's a mineral. And I know that there's a lot of mining for lithium right now because we need it for the lithium ion batteries. It may be, and I've heard about this, maybe in the Salton Sea area or some other areas, that they might actually be doing both of these things side by side. They may be tapping geothermal energy and mining for lithium at the same time in the same place because they may be co-located. So I don't think it's that the geothermal energy is somehow producing lithium, but when you say a byproduct, it may be that if you're producing geothermal energy, that you may also be able to mine and release lithium at the same time and in the same place. And I actually think that it's an area that I've invested in because I think it's for sure important. And we have to do all of this new mining that we're going to have to do for lithium and some of these other strategically important minerals in the most environmentally sensitive way that we can, right? Because you can do any of these things in a way that's not sensitive. So we have to be careful. And just as we have to be careful in the siting of wind farms, for example, you don't want to put a big bunch of wind turbines in a bird migratory pathway, so you have to be thoughtful about all of these things. And we're trying to be. And, for example, when they built the first wind turbines, they had these flat places where birds would build their nests. And so that was really bad, right? But they learned from that and they don't do that anymore. They now build the turbines in a way that birds can't nest anywhere on them. And they even do certain things to sort of repel the birds from wanting to get too close to them. So we're learning as we go, and we're trying to, be more and more sensitive about these things as we proceed.
So Susan, do you support putting a price on carbon?
Oh, absolutely. There's lots of ways to get there, and I support whatever way we can get there, right? Whatever we can pass, I'm for. We definitely need a price on carbon, but if we can't get a price on carbon, then I'm okay with tax breaks and regulation. I'm okay with all of it. I think we need to use all the arrows in the quiver. I would do it all. I would do the regulation. I'd do the tax breaks and incentives. I'd put a price on carbon. I would throw everything at it because we don't have any time to waste. So I wouldn't rule out anything, which is why I don't rule out new nuclear. I used to be kind of anti-nuclear, as many of us, I think, were. But given the choices that we're facing right now, as I said, we have to do this on a supply curve. And what I mean by that is you do the safest, cheapest things first, right? So nuclear is way out on the supply curve. We're going to have to build a lot of wind and solar and geothermal, a lot of other stuff before we even think about that nuclear, because it's slow and it's expensive. But I don't rule it out because I'm not taking anything off the table. This climate thing is the biggest challenge we've ever faced. And we can't afford to take anything off the table completely for ideological reasons. So yes, definitely support a price on carbon.
So you really made a very good point there. Very interesting. Let's see here. Oh, so James Keenly says, so wonderful. Thank you. I think he speaks for all of us. I feel like so many messages on this subject, presentation, books, films, are relentlessly negative, and you are so hopeful and optimistic. Is there any momentum within the movement to focus more on the opportunity and less on the pending apocalypse? Sorry.
I think there is momentum. I think there are many people that I work with who feel as I do, that there is hope, and hope is an action verb, right? It's not false hope. It's not like, oh, someday it's just going to disappear like magic, or God's going to save us, or anything like that. No, it's constructive hope. It's hope that's based on something in fact. It's hope based on the fact that clean energy is the cheapest energy. And I feel like we're on our way. We just have to move faster and get the right policies in place. So it's grounded hope. It's constructive hope. It's not false hope. And whether I'm optimistic, I also have constructive doubt. So I know we can fix it. I'm not sure we will fix it. That's a different question. That's a political question. And I'm not smart enough. I don't think any of us know that. Will we do what we need to do in time to avoid the worst? I've been thinking that we will, because how could we not? Because it's so clear what we need to do. And so I have this doubt about whether we will do it, but I know we can do it. And I am going to do everything in my power to make sure that we do. And I feel that there is momentum for that. My colleague, Michael Mann, one of the top climate scientists, my colleague, Catherine Hayhoe, another top climate scientist, we are friends and colleagues, and we all are in lockstep on this. We all believe that talking more about the opportunity and bringing in more people, this should not be a partisan issue, as we were saying. And we don't want to have it be so that one party's in power and they put a lot of good things in place, and then another party gets in power and takes them all away. I mean, we've just seen that happen, and with the last administration. We can't afford that. We've got to bring more people into this. So I just feel like we've got to find every way we can to bring more people in. And, you know, another piece of it for me is that sometimes people get depressed and anxious about this problem. There's a lot of eco-anxiety and eco-depression. But, you know, the problem with those things is that they're very demotivating. Anxiety and depression make you want to pull the covers over your head. I'm angry. I'm into eco-anger because, like Greta, I feel like we've got to do something, and we can't let these fossil fuel companies take our future away. And we can't let the politicians who are doing their bidding steal our future. So we should be angry. And it turns out, there's been some research on this, that anger is more closely associated with I've published 7 op-eds in the last 9 months in almost like all the major papers. I just try and take advantage of every teachable moment. And that's what we all have to do. Nature is handing us lots of teachable moments now with climate change. We've got to take advantage of every one of those. And every time a new report comes out or whatever it is, we've got to use that moment to help people understand.
You know, that I know you've reinforced that in your talk, and again now, I that may be one of the most important messages. It's so easy for everyone, including myself and Jennifer, who's sitting behind me, to get down about this. And you know, but if you don't take action, you know, you're doing yourself and the world a disservice. So action is really required. Well, we've got some more questions here, and we still have about 20 minutes left. So let me get to a question from Ann Glauber. She said she loves the side door approach that you mentioned, and that you are coaching us on how to have meaningful conversations. So she wants to know, do you have a takeaway document or a cheat sheet that you can share with us? Also, I know that you mentioned to minimize air travel, but when you absolutely have to fly, are there suggestions about how to do it with the smallest footprint? Are there better environmentally leaning airlines, for example?
So there are a few things. So my colleague Catherine Hayhoe gets so many invitations. The first thing she does is she tries to do as many as she can this way, virtually. So that way she doesn't have to get on a plane. And I do the same. So when you absolutely have to travel, one of the things she does is she combines as many things as she can into one trip. So if she's going to go someplace, she books every day, every night. She books 50 talks in 2 weeks, and she goes to that place and she does as much as she can there and comes back. So that, it's like combining your car trips instead of taking multiple trips. Now, as far as airlines, there are some things you can do. So lots of separate flights that are more miles. That's not good because every takeoff and landing is more energy. So, if you can get it, one longer flight is better than several hops. There are also, and I hesitate to mention this because there are lots of problems with them, but there are some offsets. You can give money, you can donate money to produce clean energy in exchange, in a sense, so that you're trying to offset the carbon emissions of your flight. We have to be very, very careful with these because they can easily be misused, and there's double counting and there's all kinds of problems. So you have to look for the very best ones, and there are some that are legitimate, but we really do need to try and reduce our air travel. Now, good news for the future is that short haul flights are going to probably be able to be electrified. There are now some already electric planes, smaller, 8 seats, 12 seats, that kind of thing. So commuter flights, smaller and short distances being electrified. The long haul flights, that's going to be tougher, but there may be a way to do that with green hydrogen. That is hydrogen that's produced with renewable energy, splitting water, H2O, into hydrogen and oxygen using clean energy. So hydrogen may be the answer for that. And there may be some others. So for right now, I guess I'd have to say, I don't know about a green airline, but I think you want to fly coach, you want to fly on the most full plane that you can, right? You want to take the smallest number of flights to get from point A to point B, and you want to offset. And I think that's kind of where it's at. And then we want to support the electrification of transportation. I wish we had better train system in this country. When I've been in Europe, I travel everywhere by train, and it's great. It's easy, it's convenient. I love it. We don't have that so much in most of the US. Certainly in that Northeast corridor, you can take the Acela if you're in that New York, Washington, Boston, and it's great. But most of us don't have that great, fast, convenient train travel. And I wish we did. I would travel by train. I haven't been on a plane in several years now, and I must say, I kind of like it. I'm not very inclined to fly anymore. So, and this is one of those things where when you take an individual action, there's a social contagion and it influences other people. So there's a study on this. The more houses in your neighborhood that have solar panels on the roof, the more likely you are to put solar panels on your roof. It's a social contagion. And if you know someone who's given up flying because of climate change, you're more likely to fly less because of climate change and to think about it. And if it's a famous person, a celebrity who's done it, you're even more likely to take that action. So these are the good things where we do something and there's a knock-on effect, a social contagion. I hate to use the word contagion in these kind of times, but it's the good kind of contagion.
Got it. I wanted to, by the way, Hannah, I think you're doing the Q&A from back there, but you eliminated Eileen Brumbach's question, which I was just about to ask. It was tied to the bottom of Ann Glauber's question, and Eileen's a neighbor of ours here in Chapel Hill, so I want to ask her a question if you can put it back up. But this is interesting. So Madden Quinton, who's a Holy Cross Energy board member, who's online, wanted to make a comment, and that is on the utility question. We here, meaning at Holy Cross, which I know you know, Susan, who that is, are committed to delivering 100% clean energy by 2030 while keeping rates affordable and reliability, with reliability and safety high. It can be done. So
I am so glad to hear that. I think I might follow that person on Twitter, if it's this person I think of. So that's great. And it can be done. And it can be done in every state in the union. And I am so glad to hear about that. One thing that would be really helpful would be to have Holy Cross publicize what they're doing, not only in their own area, but more broadly, so other utilities could see how it's done. And I would love to hear more from whoever put that
yeah,
question in about that.
Adam Quinton, yeah, QUITO. Yeah,
That would be super helpful. So connect us if you would.
yeah. So Walking Mountain will definitely connect you.
Good.
So here's Eileen's question. Does the survey data show that populations that are more impacted by climate change are more receptive than less impacted populations to the argument that we need to take steps to reduce carbon emissions?
Doesn't look that way. It looks like it's much more politically driven and ideologically driven. So, you know, the Democrats, if you go to a place like coastal Florida, Miami, where there's water in the streets at King Tide, and they're spending $300 million to pump the water out of the streets, tax money. It doesn't, the people there don't seem to be any more, interested in taking action on climate change than anybody else. And so what seems to drive the difference, or in a river floodplain where people's houses have been flooded out over and over again because of heavy rain. And the warmer atmosphere holds more moisture. So when it rains, you get these heavier rainfall storms. So all of these things that are tied to climate change and all of these impacts, the strongest thing is political leanings, with people who, are more liberal being more concerned and people who are being more conservative being less concerned. Sadly, it's sad to say, but that's the reality. Now, the only difference that I would point out, there has been a study on this. People who have experienced extreme weather, do they accept the reality of human-caused climate change more? And it looks like they do when it's heat and drought. So if it has to do with heat and dryness, they do. If it has to do with rain and flooding, they don't. People are not making that connection. They're not connecting those dots, even though they should be. And so that's a problem. The other thing about it is the connection that they make is short-lived. It lasts for less than a year, and people have short attention spans and short memories, it seems. That a year after or 2 years after they've experienced that extreme weather event, it has no longer has that effect. So it has effect only hot and dry, only for short time periods, and it's not nearly as strong an effect as the political one. Sadly, you would think, right? You would think that people who have experienced these things would get it and would want to take action, but they're not necessarily making the connection to climate change, right? If they don't accept the reality of human-caused climate change, then even if their house burns down, they're not going to think it's because of that. And so they're not going to make that connection, sadly.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
That's sad for sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. We got a couple more. Maybe we'll take no more than about 8 more minutes here. So Michael Wurtzel, this is kind of a reality check, I guess. Michael Wurtzel, he's someone who works in the sustainability field, and he's been become increasingly concerned that climate normalization is the most likely outcome of climate change. And that given the amount of fossil fuels online right now, he believes there's almost no chance for stopping significant warming. And he doesn't believe this is doomism, but actually realism. So why shouldn't we give people the message to prepare for the most likely future at this point?
So I disagree. I agree with some parts of that and disagree with others. So let me be clear. A certain amount of warming is baked in because of past emissions. And yes, there's a lot of fossil fuels still in production, but we can phase them out. We can do that. And so there's not a hard line, and there's not a most likely future, because the future is in our hands. We get to have the future we want to have. And if we phase out fossil fuels and deploy clean energy and protect our forests, we can prevent a lot of what might happen, what we would expect to happen if we keep going on a business as usual pathway. So John Holdren, my colleague, who used to be President Obama's science advisor, put this very well. He said, there are three things we're going to have to do in response to climate change. Mitigate, that is, reduce the emissions that are going to cause future warming. Adapt, which is make other changes to deal with the impacts that are already happening and are going to continue to happen. And the third is suffer. And the three pieces of that pie, they're movable. The more we mitigate, the less we'll have to adapt and the less we'll suffer. And the less we mitigate, the less we reduce our emissions, the more we'll have to adapt and the more we'll suffer. And the less we do of mitigation and adaptation, the more we're going to suffer. So I think that that's really the right way to look at it. So yes, we are going to have to adapt. It's already here. Dangerous climate change is already here. We can't prevent it. What we can do is prevent it from getting a hell of a lot worse. That's what we can do, and that's what we need to do. It would be unconscionable for us to just proceed business as usual and just accept that this is the way it's going to be, that it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and we're just going to keep trying to adapt. There are some things that you cannot adapt to. So if you're in Manhattan, you can build a seawall, right? The land is relatively suited for it. The real estate's super expensive. You can build a seawall. You can't build a seawall around Florida. You can't do it because it's the structure of the ground is such that if you build a seawall, the water is going to seep underneath. It's limestone. You just can't do it. You can't protect it. So a lot of people are going to have to move. And I don't use the word retreat. This is another language thing. People talk about retreating from the coastline, but retreat is such a negative word. Nobody wants to retreat. An army never retreats. It just advances in a different direction, right? So we're not going to retreat. We're going to develop advancement zones on higher ground, and we're going to move proactively. That's what we should do. Proactively. We're going to move proactively out of places that are too hot and too humid and have too many tropical diseases because of the insects that are spreading into them. We need to be proactive about this. We do have to adapt. We're already having to adapt. And so we are going to have to adapt much more in the future. But it's not a choice, either mitigate or adapt. It's both, absolutely. And suffer. We're already suffering. We're going to suffer more. So I hope that we will do what we need to do is avoid the unmanageable and manage the unavoidable. Okay, so we need to mitigate as much as we possibly can because by mitigate, I mean reduce our emissions to reduce future climate change, because we will not be able to adapt to everything. We just won't. And if you think we can just adapt to any climate change, you haven't seen some of the projections that I've seen. And so I just think we have to do it all. It's not a choice. We have to do it all. I agree with you that there's more coming, and we're going to have to adapt to it, and we're going to have to do it in a smart way. I also wrote a piece with a colleague, Parag Khanna, who just wrote a book called Move, and it's about climate migration in the United States. And it says, you may not be interested in migration, but migration is interested in you. And the reason for that is climate change. We are going to move in this country, and different places are going to become, places that were sort of hollowed out in the northern Midwest are going to become the new meccas. They're going to become new climate havens. And so that's going to be part of our adaptation, is going to be moving. So we really have to be thinking much more broadly about how we're going to deal with the future, because we're going to have to do all of it.
Well, I just hope Eagle County doesn't become the next Manhattan, because it's already getting too crowded. So, but, it's a strong message, very important. So two more, and the last one will start up on hopefully something that's a bit upbeat. But this is coming from Walking Mountain Sustainability Group. What are some of the legitimate carbon offsets that you would recommend, Susan? And we've got only about 5 more minutes, so I want one other question after this one. So
yeah, I'll be very quick on this because I haven't kept up with it lately. I haven't traveled at all, and I think most of us haven't traveled at all, so this hasn't been much of an issue for me lately. But years ago, there were some good ones. There was one years ago, again, I'm afraid to say anything because I don't know what's the current situation, but native wind was something that Native Americans were building wind turbines, wind farms, and they were doing offsets. And at that time, it was a reputable one, and I used that. I don't know what they are now, but somebody has done the research on this. Catherine Hayhoe mentioned something the other day, but I don't remember what it was. So there are some good reputable ones. I would just say, do the research, make sure they're not double counting. And, you know, if they're really cheap, they're probably not real. You know, they're probably not really doing the job. So if something looks too good to be true, it probably is. So make sure it seems, you know, do the research is what I would say. And I'm sorry, I'm remiss on that point. I will do some research on it myself. It's actually hard to keep up with all the climate science, all the psychology, all the communication science. I read as much as I can, as fast as I can, but so but that's a note to self to look back into the offset markets. I tend to be nervous about offsets in general. I tend to feel like we should do the best we can, just not to do those things. And, you know, I just think they're very prone to abuse.
Interesting. Yeah, for someone who used to buy offsets when I traveled, I stopped doing it some years ago because I couldn't quite figure out where the money was going, frankly. So I think that's part of the point that you're making.
Yeah.
Look, we do have, there's a lot of really good questions here, but I just want to.
Maybe I could do some short answers.
Yeah, I want to end with one that, no, you're doing great. I think this is a nice one to end on. And what is the most fun way of celebrating climate success?
Huh.
Can we have parties to celebrate successes that then maybe further motivate us to do more?
Well, I think the community around climate change I think that's really positive. And I think the way the community is growing and developing, that we're understanding, as my colleague Beth Salwin, who just started the Multi-Solving Institute, likes to say, we're going to solve a lot of problems at once. And the community that we build in doing that, that's really worthwhile. Right? We're all helping each other to solve our problems. The issues around environmental justice. There are so many things that we can solve at once. You know, these crowded urban centers, people sitting in traffic, all of these, there are so many problems that we can solve by more mass transit, more electrification, so many things that we can fix at the same time. And so I hope that we can really build a healthy, wonderful community, and that the celebration will be the beautiful world that we build. I think that we should look, instead of, you know, doing the apocalyptic sort of, you know, we always look at the how bad things can get. And I would like to see us imagine the better future much more often and picture that future and how good the world is going to be when it's a completely clean energy economy and our forests are protected and our wetlands are protected and wildlife species are protected and valued, and we value nature and we take sustenance from nature, because, you know, it's sort of maybe dematerialize a little bit, so that, you know, the things that really make us rich are time spent with friends and family, time spent reading and painting and making photographs and walking in the woods. And those things don't destroy the planet. Those things don't destroy what we need to have a healthy world. So I guess I like to imagine that our whole future becomes a celebration as we move to this more beautiful world. But surely the community that we build, there's a lovely book that a lot of women working in climate have contributed to called All We Can Save. And I think that's the sort of celebration of community, of all of us working together, realizing that we're each a link in the chain, and that the reach is as important as the goal, and that our doing this work is itself a celebration of life and the future. I guess that's the way I would think about it.
Susan, thank you so much for that concluding remark and for your advice, your education, and your concern and dedication to the cause. I really appreciate who you are, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Don.
Turn it back over to Scott and Mark and my friends at Walking Mountain. Mark,
well, yeah, thank you, Susan, for that inspiring closing. It makes me think a little bit about the first part of our mission, which is to awaken a sense of wonder. So I think we all want to feel that wonder and celebrate some successes as well. Susan, I appreciate you mentioning our local climate action collaborative. And I'm just going to make a couple of comments about it because there's a lot that's happening here locally. So those of you that live here are reading the Veil daily, paying attention, please keep your awareness focused on this regional transportation district that our towns in Eagle County are trying to implement. That can go a long way in trying to meet our, as you call it, methane gas reduction goals or our CO2 goals. And I also want to mention that we're working across the county on building codes. And of course, there are high standards for all new development focusing on electrification. So there's just a couple of things that are happening locally, and I hope you all pay attention to it. And thank you again, Susan, for your inspiring words. I also want to thank Don and Jennifer for their generous support of the Climate Speaker Series. And thanks to High Five Access Media for running our audio-visual systems this evening. Scott.
Yeah, and I would like to thank you all for joining us, whether you came to all of the speaker series or you're joining us here just tonight. I hope that you've enjoyed the inaugural season of the Climate Speaker Series. We hope to continue this conversation. And if there's one takeaway from tonight, we hope that all of you on your own continue this conversation around climate change and climate action. And I would like to take a quick minute here to promote a new series of programs we're doing. Our Climate Action Week is an extended week of events to inspire climate action and highlight some of those local climate action partners that we work with in the Climate Action Collaborative. We will have activities throughout the weeks held across Eagle County to represent all of the sectors involved in the Climate Action Collaborative, including highlighting our local food systems, community youth, advocating for the environment, community programs, and much more. So I hope you will join us April 21st through the 30th, all around the county, to engage with us in climate action and help us meet our climate action goals. For more information and a full schedule of events, please visit our website at walkingmountains.org/programs/Climate Action Week for a full list of events. And again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening and throughout the series. And we hope to see you again shortly.